Good morning and welcome to everyone. Thank you for joining us for the Michigan Co-op April webinar, sort of a webinar, more like a conversation. This morning we have some Michigan Co-op superintendents that have been retired or who have moved on. And I'm excited about this session. Marcia has been very generous and willing to put it all together for me, so I didn't have to do it and facilitate the conversation. The Michigan Co-op's been around for more than 15 years, and Marcia started it. So that's really what this is going to be about. We're talking to the superintendents, which is the reason why she started it, because of the asking, and she'll tell you more about that. But I'm really excited for everyone to hear from them. We do have a lot of people who had RSVP'd that know that they're going to get the recording, so I can see that might be why some people may not hop on. But during this conversation, feel free to unmute your mic and ask questions or put things in the chat. I'll be monitoring the chat and can ask those questions for individuals as well. So, Marcia, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you. Well, my first comment is to thank Lisa. The first year or two or three, I don't remember what it was, Lisa. And I don't think we actually had a start date for Michigan Co-op because, and I'll kind of explain how we got together at first. But it was Mike Haynes, one of our participants today, introduced me to Lisa. And then the Michigan Co-op just changed completely. I'm the big picture person. Lisa's a detail person. She brought a business background to the whole thing, and her friendship means the world to me, and that's the most important part. So I want to thank you, Lisa, for asking me to do this. As I mentioned to you a little bit ago, the memories have been flowing through my brain. What really launched this was that I wrote the first 21 seat time waivers for the state of Michigan. I was kind of asked to do that, and after a while, I was kind of like not asked anymore. I'm kind of kidding, but it really took off. People heard about these seat time waivers. And as a result of that, the initial people with the seat time waivers were doing things that no one else had done. In fact, Jim, I'm going to quote you for a minute. They talked about, they were doing innovative work. And Jim, you know how you hear somebody say something, it sticks with you. And one of the things Jim always told us was that if somebody says to do the innovative work that you want, you need to use best practice. Then it's not innovative if there's best practice established already. So he really framed for me what innovation is, and for the Michigan Co-op as well. Because what happened is we had true innovators who were really taking the courage it took to really get out there and do something very different. And as I worked with them, they were all over the state. As I worked with them, I realized that, they really needed somebody who was doing things, maybe not the same thing, but was doing something that was really never had been done before. And so I got 5 of them together. And my recollection, it was down in Lansing at Clara's. And when we were, hey, John, good morning. When we were there, it was just real interesting because the conversation was just, it was just vibrant, and it was just explosive. And it was also very, they shared some of their concerns. They didn't really know each other, to be honest with you, but, they really did some of the conversation. You could tell they needed more of this. So I said, well, let's just keep doing this. And organically, the Michigan Co-op grew. There was nothing planned. I dare say that myself, and when Lisa came on board, we never would have anticipated, nor any of those of you who were participants, where this would go. Not at all. And then as it grew and grew, and different ideas grew, they shared ideas. They were not, here's another piece. I made sure that the initial people were not contiguous. So I wanted to make sure that I didn't create a competitive environment. Well, then John Chandler, and unfortunately John has passed away, but John Chandler was up in Manistee. And so that didn't touch anybody. And then he applied for a job down in Manistee. And it was like, oh, here we go. But fortunately, the Michigan co-op superintendents were wonderful about, collaborating and not worrying about, they just wanted to serve kids. That was the main thing. So I want to, I'll come back to a couple other ideas in a little bit, but I'd like to get our definer of innovation to first. I'd like all the participants to please introduce themselves. And Jim, if it's all right, I'm going to start with you.
I'm Jim Birmingham. I was a superintendent in numerous districts. The last was Berrien Springs. And that pretty much, now I'm retired. I run a management company um, for alternative students, all virtual right now. So that's it.
Thank you. Dave?
I'm Dave Tebow. I am currently the Director of Innovation Services for the Ottawa Area Intermediate School District. Prior to that, I spent 15 years as a school superintendent, 3 of those in Michigan Center and my last 12 in Hamilton. And we took a sleepy little town that didn't want to talk about anything, and we started trying to put the work on the map for the teachers that were doing great things, which brought its own challenges all on its own. So it was a lot of fun, though.
Thanks, Dave. Eve?
I'm Eve Kaltz. I worked in Centerline Public Schools for 32 years. The last 13, I served the district as the superintendent. And my team and I were able to do a lot of things that still are having a great impact on that community. This morning, I had breakfast with some of my former board members, and we talked about the things that are continuing to bless that district. I'm currently serving as the president of the school board for a Christian K-12 school and served on a Christian college board, and have gotten involved with serving senior citizens. I volunteer in senior homes and I've always wanted to do that, and that brings me lots of joy. So
That's great. Thank you. Mike Haynes?
Hi, Mike Haynes. So I was superintendent for the Nice Community School District, which is where I met Marcia. Then I went over to Wisconsin and spent about 10 years as a superintendent, or the equivalent of, at an ISD there, and then came back to work for Char-M ISD. And recently became my own independent contractor, and I'm an associate for Hazard Young and Atea. So we do superintendent searches, strategic planning, et cetera.
Cool.
Thank you for having me.
Great. Yes. John?
I'm John Van Wagner. I'm the superintendent currently at Traverse City Area Public Schools. I've been here for 6 years now, and I think I was trying to debate when we started with the MiCoOp network. I think I was still at the State Department of Ed.
You were.
Either that or and then I transitioned. I was assistant at Shiawassee RESD, then was superintendent in Alpena for 4 years. So have been on the journey, still in it. And still believe in the work very enthusiastically, but also tiringly often, and just appreciate really almost 20 years worth of stuff that we've been trying to push with this, and I feel like we're closer than ever, but still a little ways away. So hopefully we keep going.
That's a good way to put it, John. And we're all still fighting the fight, so to speak. Just as a frame of reference for those of you who don't know me, I obviously did live in Michigan, but now I live in Albuquerque, and I'm just going to tell you it's another hidden gem. So if you ever get a chance, come on down and make sure you let me know. But my heart with education is still right there in Michigan with all of you. So I really, it's a privilege. I'm glad Lisa asked me to do this. One of the things that occurred yesterday, as I was talking to one of the corporate individuals that the Michigan CoOp worked with regularly, and we were just talking generically about some of the changes that John just referenced that we're still kind of going toward and hoping to get there. And one of the things that he said is that oftentimes it's kind of the adversity or the what's the other word I was going to use with you guys? Anyway, the change occurs because you have to. It's not because you've got no other choice or something like that. And I immediately jumped in and said, oh, wait a minute, let's think back to the Michigan CoOp. That isn't what they needed. They didn't need to have adversity. They didn't have something like COVID or something like that to really drive change. They drove change because the center of every conversation and all of their work was students. That was it, totally the kids. And that made us all very proud. It made us very focused. And it was a big part of the different kinds of initiatives that took place. I mean, Dave Tebow, I'm just going to reference yours for a minute. When you were talking about being in Hamilton, I can remember when we came down to visit you, and you had the outdoor education and the various programs that were going on with your students, helping other students. And there was so much more than just teaching math. I'm a former math teacher. It was so much more than that. It was a lot of it was you could feel the heartfelt desire to really want to make a difference for kids. So, that call really helped me kind of define our Michigan CoOp superintendents. And they're very courageous, and they're risk takers in the good sense. It isn't like no one ever wanted to put kids at risk, but they knew they needed to try things and then adapt. You try it, and one of the things that this person said to me yesterday was, just remember, Michigan CoOp, you need to fail fast and then learn and go. And he didn't want us to wait until we all had everything perfected. He wanted us to go because he believes so strongly in all of you. What I'd like to do is we're going to do a roundtable conversation, which means that the participants and the rest of you too, you can unmute your microphone. We're going to have a conversation rather than anything else. I'm going to get it going, and I can interject some of the questions that they have seen and that kind of thing. Just kind of see how it goes. But knowing these people, knowing these superintendents, they've never shied away. I mean, that's our meetings that Lisa and I would get going. We get it started, then off they would go. So I look forward to that. We have other superintendents on with us too, and people we've worked with, and it's nice to see those familiar faces I haven't seen for a while. So, jump in anytime you get a chance. The first question that I have, and I'm going to see if they battle it out to see who's the first.
Oh, Marcia, you muted yourself.
Marcia, you're still on mute.
Okay, I'm back. One of the things I wanted to get started with is kind of the why behind two things. Why did you want to write a seat time waiver? Because that is how I connected with a lot of the initial people. And what kind of drove you or inspired you to become part of the Michigan CoOp? So first things first, why did you want a seat time waiver?
I can jump in.
Okay.
First, I'll apologize. I've got this hideous thing on my face, so that's why there's this Band-Aid. So please just ignore it. So I first met you, Marcia, or called you frantically after we were awarded the Project Reimagine status, which is also where I think I met John for the first time. And we had proposed some really bold initiatives. One of them was a virtual academy, which I had no idea how we were going to do that. It looked good on paper. And you helped us figure out what we needed to do. And one of them was the seat time waiver. So that was sort of opening a door for us to be involved from the ground level, and super helpful. And your work, Marcia, as you may know, is still paying off because that same academy is still running. So that's how we started.
Thank you.
I'll
jump in
speak a little bit to that seat time waiver, Marcia. Your beginning, you talked about we were doing all of this for the benefit of kids and everything. That was true. But everything that I was doing is trying to find a new revenue sources. because we were in survival mode. We were having years where we were getting cut in state aid back then.
Mhm.
And the state had evolved into excuse makers. We could blame everything on the state. It's all the state's fault.
Mhm.
And we allowed ourselves to become victims because of that. And we were going to take a different approach in Barry, and we were going to, and it was in the middle of the school of choice when everybody was figuring
Mhm.
that out.
Mhm.
So in order for myself in a district that wasn't one of the top districts considered in the county or in the ISD, how was I going to separate myself from my competition? And part of that was find programs that other districts weren't offering and
Mhm.
initiatives that were good for kids. But I got to be honest with you, a lot of my motivation was finding new revenue streams. So that instead of having a district that was just surviving, we could offer great programming for our resident students.
Well, I'll come alongside that too. I mean, I think Jim said, when I entered Hamilton, we had a $1.6 million structural deficit on a $24 million budget. That's a big hole. And we needed to find creative ways to do that. But the core of it was seat time is an archaic thing. And it was built on a model that is inherently designed to sort and separate kids. And I won't jump up on that soapbox and beat that dead horse, but um, I realized and we knew learning doesn't just happen from 7:30 to 2:30 or 8:30 to 3:30. And that that held back our learners. It kept them in a box that worked for compliance-driven students who could check the boxes and could play the game. And we knew that that wasn't how our kids are learning all the time. So we were trying to find flexibility to meet the needs of the kids and families that had different setups, and they had a different flow to their life, a different flow to when and how they wanted to learn. And it just drove back to my personal belief that we need to personalize education for every kid. And inside of a system where we put a lot of impetus on our teachers to be superheroes for the 25 kids to 30 kids that they have in elementary setting, or the 150 kids they see in a middle school and high school setting, that's really hard to do when you have a limited amount of time. And so how do you open that up and then start to figure out where are other ways in which we can define success for our kids that really tell their whole story?
Mhm. Would anyone else like to add anything? What is it that, so the seat time waiver, it sounds like, Jim, you did it. You can say that you did it for revenue stream, but that was, it didn't feel like that I mean, and I know working with superintendents, that had to be the case, but you were all kid oriented, as all of you were. I mean, and initially what drove people to kind of get involved, the why that I saw was to really make a difference and to learn, best practice, if you will, with things like virtual learning, because that was a tough thing to navigate. I mean, you have kids that you're not, don't have physical touch points with them. What is it that, how did each of you hear about the Michigan CoOp, and what kind of drove you to inquire or get involved if you were not one of the initial ones?
Well, when I started in the district, within probably the first 4 or 5 months, I walked into the people accounting office, and there was a tall stack of CAs on her desk. And I picked one up and said, "What are these?" And she said, "Oh, those are kids we just send out." And I said, "Where are we sending them to?" And she said, "Alternative schools." And I said, "So the students that have the greatest struggle in the traditional model, we're sending into even a more difficult environment and expecting that they will succeed." And she said, "Well, I don't know. Basically we need them out of our system because they're not fitting in." And to me, that just was horrifying because we had committed to serving all of the students of Centerline. And so that began the journey of, what can we offer that isn't the typical alternative ed program, has a lot more flexibility, allows for some of those students who actually were working to help support a family, allowed some flexibility in when they were able to learn. And it was a tremendous gift because we started with your group, and John moved down to the district and helped us establish Academy 21, which has been such a gift to so many students for so many reasons. Students that had a lot of behavioral problems, they had learning difficulties, or they just truly had to work to help support their siblings or whatever it may be. It offered them that flexibility, and still there was a physical place where they could come and get a lot of support. And that has worked out very, very well for those students and continues today.
Thank you. Anyone else want to kind of throw something in? How about John? You want to add anything to?
Well, like I said in the beginning, the interesting thing for me is a lot when a lot of that started, I was at the State Department of Ed.
Yeah.
And so, we were at that time, it was, pre-Race to the Top, where I felt like Race to the Top changed all the focus of everything. But I do think it was, the intent and the idea of like Project Reimagine and all that work was to begin to think outside of these boundaries. I go back to, I remember being at the State Department and having a meeting where we had some outside consultant come in and talk about education being like Boy Scout and Girl Scout merit badges, and the idea of that things could be done outside of the traditional school day, and what does that mean and how does that look like? And it really has expanded on that, and I think a lot of the districts we're trying to think of, while Jim says there's a financial part, I think that being an entrepreneurial spirit was that, but I think also was this idea of, I remember vividly Jim talking about, trying to not just create a bigger box, but, of being outside the box, but not just a little bit bigger box, but really trying to think outside of all of that. And still resonates with me today, that idea of, I think that unfortunately over 20 years, we have expanded the box, but I don't think we've been able to, burn the box. And I think there's many of us still in the work that are trying to do that. But that initial thoughts that, with the entrepreneurial spirit, that I think that the initial group of superintendents that were a part of the Michigan CoOp, I think, that has resonated and continues to this day. And now we're just trying to figure out ways to literally get rid of the box. I think we pushed to that edge and are trying to get there. So it's, the work, again, I will kind of keep talking about the work still continues.
John, I have a question for you, because one of the things that, I remember when you were at MDE, and I think that is how we first intersected, as I was writing the seat time waivers and helping districts with the Reimagine projects as well. And, what do you think your experience there brings to us today?
I think that, having, I still believed in my heart, that having champions somehow within government is what we've continued and we recognize is the avenue to be able to do this. That, I think that to Jim's point, to an extent, I still, I think we've gotten a lot better at maybe not making as much excuse of, well, the state won't let us, when sometimes that's not even the case. I see more and more and more districts and superintendents that are trying to think differently. I think even culture-wise across our country, I think that the education movement is starting to even become more, even on the political scene, of doing things differently. But I think that the amount of advocacy that superintendents now that are being innovative of working with legislators. I mean, I could tell you when we started the co-op, I don't know that any of us had ever much met with legislators.
Never.
And now we've got their cell phone numbers and meet with them all the time and have dinners and, all over the place. And so I think understanding that level of advocacy and understanding really school law, I mean, to an extent, I think we're so much more in depth in knowing. I mean, there are many people that, are part of the co-op in the past, now others that, are literally writing legislation and handing it, to legislators and think tanks and others and writing articles. I know Mike just wrote an article recently that was in the Detroit, I think, Free Press or News, and that's talking about pushing those envelopes. And so the advocacy part, we've ramped up to a level recognizing that from the ground level troops to get to that point. It's been interesting to see that so much different than when we started, even thinking that we would be so almost our own education lobby firms, from with still toothpicks and pencils, doing it. But I think, we've got the attention, and that's why I just feel like we are closer to that cusp of actually making
Yes.
change.
I totally agree with you. I
Well,
totally agree.
Marcia, I'm gonna come alongside that. And I think the other piece of that was, and when I joined, one, because I think to John's point, we needed to have a different voice at the table. We spent a lot of time as superintendents reacting to what the state gave us or what legislators gave us. And right, legislators, and I won't say anything too bad about them, but many of them think that they know education because they went to school, right? And so they've got this nostalgia for what school was, and they want to create a better model of what was. And there was a group of us who were saying, we can do this differently. We can meet the needs of more kids. We can meet the needs of families that are looking for something different. And we made a jump to say, we're going to partner, we're going to create a shared time program, we're going to create a virtual school, somewhat like what Eve said. Like, I didn't want alternative school to be a place where those kids went. I wanted alternative school to be a norm so that we could say, look, every kid needs something different. And when you do that, you go out on that limb. Being a superintendent's lonely by default. When you're pushing the envelope to try something new, it becomes even more lonely, and you get a target on your back based on the comfort level of what is. And so I needed a group of people like in this group to be able to bounce ideas off of and to be a think tank. And Jim said it, right? When you quoted him in the beginning, if we measure innovation with the metrics of the past, every innovation is going to look like it fails. And so we had to creatively have some people to say, well, what else are we doing? What's the value add? Yes, we do what we've traditionally done, and we're doing all these other things. That's a hard conversation in a system that inertia and culture wants to stay safe, right? Because we're working with kids and nobody wants us to say we're experimenting with children. But at what point are we able to try new things and then fail and have the cultural mindset of let's pick ourselves back up, dust ourselves off, what worked, what didn't work, let's try again, because what is at the core of this is good work.
I'll piggyback on both of those two last statements and just say similar things that, when my district was, coming at me with pitchforks and flames because I was implementing things that didn't seem realistic, it was super helpful to occasionally meet with this group and be reminded that that's our job, that it's okay to upset the apple cart because that's what we need to do as leaders. And I think so oftentimes, like I can't imagine doing anything that I did at NICE had I not had Marcia and everybody that was part of that group at that time right there alongside me. So whether they knew it or not, they gave me a lot of strength to continue moving forward with what I felt like was the right path. So the networking, the value of networking and not being alone in the work.
Marcia, the co-op was always very valuable. That part of it, you could get together with people who understand the battles you're going through. Going way back, and I imagine still to a degree now, we were the first on the block in a lot of initiatives. For instance, Berrien was the first to form homeschool partnerships, those kind of things. I can tell you that we really were in the mindset of don't ask for permission, just do it.
Beg
Because
forgiveness.
no, we did it all. I can name two or three things, and there was a risk reward factor because everything
Right.
in the end has a financial component. You can all talk
Yeah.
about kids and everything, but everything has a financial component to it. And if you tried something and all of a sudden the state comes back and takes away your revenue, you got
Right.
yourself some problems. So one of the ways that we were into in Berrien is we just weren't going to ask for permission because um, if they came and said shouldn't be doing this, oh, I didn't realize that. We tried to press things, but coming around with a group of people who understood that conversation versus thinking you were criminals over there for really pressing the bubble. I mean, if we could meet 100 years from now, I'm thinking you're going to have the same discussions. I really think you're going to have the same discussions. Everything on the legislative side changes every 8 years. You're starting over and over and over forever. I think to a degree, you just got to take care of things at your level. And if they're working, share them with the people, for instance, in the co-op who have understanding. You know, I don't think there's any shortcut to that. We hire lobbyists. We're doing it all now, but with very mixed results. You have to be bold and innovative.
One of the things that, as you guys are talking, we visited so many of your districts, and that was immensely powerful for me, and I can imagine even much more so for each of you. And as I look around here, we went to most of these districts. And it was, Eve, I don't think I'll ever forget the ambulance that you had set up in that back room and how you shared with us how that was utilized in educating kids. And then you also shared, Eve, that, when John came down, John Bailey was one of the consultants that also, worked with Michigan CoOp and with the company, the consulting company I had was EdTech Specialists. And that all grew out of who knows what. I don't remember. That was not my intent when I retired, but it worked out beautifully. And I'm very proud of the work that we did. But even we came down to visit you, and you took us into the cafeteria and you showed us how you were training students or teaching students to really have other tools other than just the traditional. Is there anything in particular that John said and he went down and lived down in Centerline. It was very cool. Was there anything in particular, Eve, that you recall that really stood out as one of the programs that really turned a lot of lives around or initiated change?
Well, the district at that point in time, the average household income was 31,000, and I don't know that it's improved a whole lot. And so we had a lot of urban-like issues, and the idea that all kids go to college and just for that population was so tragic because the catalyst for the academies was a student who, as far as we know, had never lived in with a biological parent, did a lot of what the kids couch surfing. And when I met with him, he came in as an 8th grader, and I just said, we really want you to come every day. You need to let me know how we can help you. And he said, I'll be here every day. I'll be polite. I'll encourage other kids to be polite, but I'm not really interested in school. And the classes don't mean much to me. I don't see how they could ever help me in life. And as a senior then, a few years later, he told me, when I asked him what his plan was for the following year, he said, I have nothing because I'm not going to college. And if you don't go to college, you're nothing. And that began the journey toward the career academies. And we partnered with we contacted about 65 owners or HR or presidents of companies in our area, because we were in a highly industrialized area. And they really sat at the table to help with planning, because the goal was to make everything relevant to the next step in life and help kids understand what their strengths and talents were, and then what careers aligned with those. And, college became a conversation after they had really discovered things that were truly of interest and had made a decision for their first career out of high school. And if college was necessary, then we began that work. But I think, John was a free spirit, and as he walked the high school hallways, and I began to share the work we were going to do toward the Career Academy model, he just, it was just like, that's what we need to do. I mean, that's what every high school needs to do. We need to not focus on their success during the 4 years of high school, but really the success of what happens once they leave the high school. Mm-hmm. Have we equipped them? Mm-hmm. Have we given them what perhaps their families cannot or do not? If they're not living with biological families. So, I mean, we have story after story to this day of kids that really had no idea or direction, because parents or parent, worked in a job that the child wasn't interested in, or that was really their only exposure, who, came from South Warren, just horrible poverty, pretty tough circumstances, and became a certified paramedic or a certified firefighter, or, went into a trade school and surpassed household income within a short time. So I think everything about the group there through the co-op, it was just the idea that innovation was possible, and even more important, like necessary, mm-hmm. as stewards of the future of the students that we served. Sometimes we had to really go out on a limb and do things that could benefit them, not just in our pre-K-12 system, but more importantly, just beyond that and into the future. So, and I did not work in a county that celebrated or embraced a lot of innovation or change. So that was, really a battle, because at superintendent's meetings with the county, we would have leadership say, well, maybe we should, homeschool them, and they'd use air quotes, or right, Eve, or just kind of mocking some of the things we were doing. And but I continue to hear from kids whose lives have been changed because of the bold actions we took with the change at the high school, which trickled down then, because that whole model really starts at the elementary. So they've been able to really continue the work and begin to solidify that at an early age. And I wish my kids would have had that opportunity. They were in it was about advanced placement classes and, the college focus. And 3 went to college, and 1 makes more money than the 3 that went to college, because he went into the trades and did very well.
Interesting. Yeah. So I'm going to pause for just a second, because Chris Davidson, you're one of our former superintendents, and I see a Michael on here. Now, I don't know who the Michael is, but Mike Murray, if that's you, and you want to chime in, would you please do so? Because if it isn't Mike Murray, he's still going to hear about it. But if it is Mike Murray, Mike was really one of the very initial people that kind of got the ball rolling, because Mike was my principal, and then he became superintendent up in Sutton's Bay. And so we've been connected for a long, long time. And the conversations, he'd always push our thinking, as all of you have done. I had, this connection with Mike of, what do you want to do to make things different for kids? So Mike, if you're there and you want to say something, go for it. And I'll pause for just a second because Chris Davidson, you're the other one. I want to ask you this, Chris, because I don't know if you remember how we met Daryl. I honestly don't remember how I met Daryl, and Lisa, I don't know if you remember, we were in Grayling and we had a panel up front and we invited Daryl to be part of that panel. We really didn't know him. I'd had a
I
conversation
had
with
reached
him.
out to Daryl when I was doing
You did.
consulting for you. Because I was from the UP. And I
Yes.
don't remember why I reached out to him. I don't remember the reason, but I had reached out to him at some point, and then I mentioned that we were having that conference in Grayling, and he's like, "Yeah, I want to come."
Yes.
Yeah.
And it was fascinating because he sat up there and when he started talking, the whole place was quiet because he did make change based on the need, on the necessity for change. He did it because, Chris, I mean, you were up there after Daryl. And what I believe Daryl talked to us about, he said something about, oh, I've got Wi-Fi on all my buses. And we're all sitting there going, huh? Why? Well, because most of the kids were not on buses for a long time. If you're up in Calumet and you've got activities of some kind down in the Detroit or southeastern area, you're going to be on the bus for hours. And he didn't want the kids to fall behind. So, Chris, at what point did you kind of get connected with Daryl and Calumet?
Okay. I'm assuming that's not Mike Murray. So if I'm cutting you off, Mike, sorry. But yeah, I'll jump in on that question, Marcia, because if I let it go, I'll probably forget what you asked me. So I was with Daryl. Geez, I was with Calumet for 17 years.
Mm-hmm.
In the grand scheme of things, I started out there as math and science instructor at an alternative school, which was the first time ever. I never really knew what alternative ed was, but that was the only job option I had to get back to the UP. And so I took it, and the rest is history. But so Daryl was superintendent at the time when I came on board. And so, yeah, he had some grand ideas, right? I think, his interest in virtual ed came from, we had one big family who operated businesses in the summer and wanted to travel during the school year. Well, obviously that doesn't jive in the traditional model. So when we started going down the path of virtual, he felt that it was an alternative type program. So I got to get the foundation of that going with him. Facilitate it, and that was the first. So the fun part is I got to work with the first family of Calumet, which what eventually became UP Virtual, right? So that idea to meet the needs of one family then expanded to a UP wide virtual program between CLK schools and Gladstone, and I think Jay Calbertus was part
He was, yep,
of that time
he's
there
still
with
there, I
Daryl as
think.
well. And so that was how it started. And then as I ended up at the high school principal position under Daryl, and Daryl started grooming me then to take his place upon retirement, that's really when I got plugged into the Michigan CoOp. Joining him at conferences and monthly meetings and conversations and things of that such. So it was awesome. Daryl had a lot of great ideas, right? Like you said, from Wi-Fi on the bus, because Calumet it's over 400 square mile district. There's some long bus rides to make that happen. And so that was a big step. But then, as you talked about, athletic competitions, right? That transportation piece was huge. Being one of the first districts to go 1-to-1 with iPads, which, was we learned a ton. It was extremely challenging. But again, we had the great idea, put it together, the homeschool partnership. I mean, now CLK, I think, has over 300 heads participating in either UP Virtual and the homeschool partnership program there. So it's amazing. It has its own center, it has its own director. I mean, that program is just taken off. And again, going back to what Jim had mentioned about being in a tight situation, right? Early 2000s housing market crash. We're getting cuts in state aid. While Daryl was trying to solve some bigger issues from the innovation side of things right and trying to meet the needs of our kids, and where he believed education was going, it was a way to stabilize, right? And so when others were making cuts, we might be able to offer a 0.5% off grid raise, but at that point in time, right, that was a big deal. To be able to do that, right? And so those two things together, he was able to do. So I learned a ton from Daryl. Grateful for his opportunity to plug me in, and I've stayed a part of the Michigan CoOp even in my latest adventure here, about I don't know, an hour south of Calumet. So
That's exciting.
Chris brought up can I just jump in a second, Marcia? Chris
Please,
brought up a
please.
good thing about when Daryl worked with him, introduced him to the Michigan CoOp and with the other leaders and got him involved. And to me, that transition is so important because there have been, Berrien Springs was the same thing, is, having those individuals below you that are, I don't say grooming them to take over, but essentially helping them, to have that transition. So the things in your district stay and that vision stays and that whole like-mindedness of doing what's right for the kids, even if it's hard and risky, and really challenging. And so I think that's really an important piece is that depth of what the Michigan CoOp offers for those districts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the Michigan CoOp gave Daryl that connection and that confidence to do what he did, right? Because there was nobody nearby. And honestly, he was ostracized by all UP superintendents. I think he stopped going to all the meetings because they just got ugly, right? They didn't like what he was doing, and it was a competitive environment. So it was too bad. But Michigan CoOp gave him that support that he needed, and then I appreciated because he extended that into my time at Calumet. So for the 6.5 years I was superintendent at Calumet, I mean, he was there with me the whole time, continuing to provide not just support that Michigan CoOp continued to do, but give me that that insight, that confidence to keep forging ahead on that path.
One of the things that I introduced in the beginning was how you guys all focused on students, and you just restated a similar kind of statement, Chris. The question I have, though, for all of you, really, this is open to everybody, but and our superintendents or the participants today in the roundtable, what benefits did you see to your district, to the parents, to the families, to the teachers? What did you see that you maybe didn't expect? What benefits were there district wide and human wide?
Just wanted to say good morning. It's nice to hear that all of you still have the passion.
It is you. Can you add anything, Mike, since you've got your microphone on? Can you share a little bit with us? Smile everywhere right now. We all love hearing your voice, Mike.
I just downloaded this Zoom this morning, and I haven't figured out how to do the video yet, so I haven't jumped in on it, but it's so good to hear everybody and to think back on those times. Yeah, we all would have been really lonely without the support of each other, and I think that's the beauty of the whole co-op.
Mike, do you remember when we first gathered as a group up in Sutton's Bay? I don't know how far after the Clara's lunch that was, but you hosted us. And at that point, I remember teachers coming to you and saying, hey, why is this just administration? We need to all be involved. We're all involved in these implementations and initiatives. Do you recall that, Mike? And did that launch a different kind of feeling amongst the teachers to get involved?
Well, absolutely. The teachers have to be part of the whole process, and that's one of the things I learned early on is you don't lead from the top, you lead from within. You bring everybody along with you. And I can remember bringing my two union chiefs down with me to a superintendent's conference, and superintendents just did not like that at all.
Did they state why?
they weren't part of the club.
Yeah, yeah.
Hey,
No,
Marcia, I'll speak a
yeah,
little bit
please.
to what it did for a district. In our group, it was superintendents and leaders, district leaders. And so we were kind of on the global basis of things. I can remember Dave Seitz. You remember Dave Seitz from Apple? I mean, back in that generation, we all came in three-piece suits, and Dave Seitz would come in with his blue jeans and some Apple kind of t-shirt. And we were, he was very beneficial to me. He opened up my mind outside the educational community. I think we're all bound to a degree by the educational community. We came up in it. We went to college directly. And here's Dave Seitz, and we were talking about different initiatives that we wanted to put in place that might not work. And Dave Seitz' favorite statement that I'll never forget was, at Apple, we want to get to failure faster. We want to try new things. It's okay. It's okay to have them fail, but we need to get there fast so we can, modify or start something over. So it went from the global to the granular. If you were preaching that change concept, you had to go back to your teachers, and it didn't have to be innovative, but you had to give them a license to innovate at their granular level and accept the fact that some of what they do might not be successful, even if it impacted negatively that great student data that the districts were going to be judged on, for God's sakes. So it forced us, if we're going to be honest about it, to say, hey, if it's okay for us to fail at the global level, then it's granular at the teacher level. It's okay for them to try new things and for it to failure, as long as they learn from their failure and try something different if it's not working. So I thought it had great impact, and it created great enthusiasm in our district and pride that we were doing things different than our neighboring districts around us. So I thought that was some of the advantage.
Dave Seitz had a big impact on all of us. In fact, the quotes that I used this morning of this corporate person were from Dave. I talked to Dave yesterday, and I was telling Lisa, I can still, just like you're saying, Jim, I remember him walking into a meeting with his jeans and his turtleneck, the Steve Jobs kind of turtleneck. I mean, he was Apple, and he thought like Apple. He really did bring a different dimension to our conversations, which was very, very helpful. And I look at how, kind of getting back to the impact on teachers, what did, I'm asking it because I kind of know what you did, Jim, and I know what some of you did, get your teachers involved and engaged. And Mike, Murray, you talked about that too. How can we do that today? I mean, and how can we initiate some of these ideas today? What are the innovative programs? Just thinking back to what you said, Jim, about best practice. What is innovation right now? What are you guys doing that are innovative? Now, there aren't many of you sitting here right now, to be honest, that are still acting as, active superintendents, but there are a few of you. What are you doing right now? And what's the environment? Looking at Chris and John in particular, I don't know that anyone else is still active. Is there anything, what changes have you seen? Do you feel more encouraged about the changes that you're trying to make? Are there innovative programs? What are you doing right now that was really outside that box?
I'll start. I think that there's a term that was coined that I still use all the time that I don't hear as much anymore, but ELOs are external learning opportunities, right? It was the original idea and thought of kind of the seat time waiver kind of that I think has maybe even bloomed more is the idea of, it goes back to even like the homeschool partnership work, all that, like the idea that learning doesn't necessarily have to happen inside the four walls of what we call school, and that it shouldn't be bound by time. And so I still think that's the theme that I think there's a lot of work that's been done, that competency works, that some early folks that we talked to, Rose Colby, those beginnings in that. I think that the competency-based education thing is getting more and more and more conversation traction, especially in the CTE world. It's become almost a norm for a lot of career centers that have transitioned to more of a competency-based than, an ABCD, kind of an element. So I'm seeing more and more nationally, work that's been done with micro schools and those ideas of, again, that learning doesn't have to happen within the four walls, and there are many more people that don't want the learning to happen in the four walls. And so I think that, learning how to do models that are based off of mastery, and without, a need to say it's based on a time, is gaining more and more traction. And we're just trying to break through those final pieces of pupil accounting that still are trying to force that learning to happen in those four walls. But there's more and more people that are talking about it, even legislators. It's just getting in the lingo more, competency-based ed. In order for that truly to happen, you've got to break the time barriers, which goes all the way right back to the seat time waiver, that was done. And so we're trying to, we actually are using the waiver to its fullest extent, like with our alternative ed, that Fridays the kids are doing all the external learning opportunities. Everything's outside. We have 300 kids, that everything's being done, but it's digital badging, has kind of come, to front and center with that, kind of that beginning idea of almost 20 years ago, sit at MD with Boy Scout and Girl Scout merit badges with digital systems and learning management systems that now allow you to give, credentials. And I would say credentials, especially in the workforce world, is maybe even more prevalent getting to be than college credit. Is, the skills that you can demonstrate you can do and the credentialing you have for that, especially in the IT world, is much more prevalent and continuing to push the envelope. And we're even starting to see higher ed. Arizona State University is doing a ton. Southern New Hampshire, or maybe Northern New Hampshire. I don't remember which one that
It
is.
is Southern.
And so you're seeing more and more, even post-secondary, that is starting to get into that world. And like I said, but I'm amazed that the Carnegie Foundation, the very, very entity that started all of this with Andrew Carnegie to create what we call, school of, 4 years of math, 3 of science, 3 of social studies, and all that. That very entity that created it is now one of the leaders to try and say it needs to be broken apart. And so, being able to see that kind of evolution that's happening is exciting, but ready to break through the wall that we're not quite there yet.
John brought up competency-based education, and that has been a conversation that we've had for a long time. But it's easier said than done. But, John and the rest of you who are familiar with or have implemented CBE on some level, how does that change the, the mindset for innovation, for programs that, could be created if CBE is brought into the mix? And why is it taking so long to really get people, on board with it? Because it does make sense, as you explained, John. And Mike Murray, you've often told us too that, learning is not based on time. If it were, it would be magic. It'd be great. You just have a kid sit in the seat for 8 hours a day and you're done. That doesn't work. We need to have other ways of doing that. How does CBE fit into all of this, Mike Haynes?
I'm going to throw something out there. So if you talk to MDE, because after I wrote that article, I got a download, there are a lot of competency-based efforts afoot. The problem, though, I think the root cause, though, that's limiting us from going there full bore, or people shy away from it, is the seat time. I mean, if you remove seat time completely, then the only way to demonstrate any kind of accountability is competency. So I think we're arguing for competency-based education, arguing against seat time, but I think we could just do it all by arguing against seat time. Get rid of seat time. The only accountability measure is going to be whether students are learning or not, right? So I mean that's an over simplistic way of saying that, but I think we're so close. It's just a matter of getting the right people on the bus to say it's time to abolish that. And I got the legislature and and then that also then destroys the pupil accounting manual, and all the headaches that we've talked about for the last 15 years go away. So that's my 2 cents.
Mike, you're saying, it's like a chicken and egg thing now. You need to get rid of seat time, but you need to have something kind of that's going to take over.
Right.
So
right.
what do you see as the chicken or the egg? How do we do that? And by getting rid of seat time, are you referring to the 1,098 hours, 180 days? Is that what you mean, to eliminate that?
Like the sole determining factor in whether a student progresses from grade to grade or eventually grade to graduation should be whether or not they are proficient, competent in the skills that we've already got. We've got approved curriculums, we've already got standards. So the only way to do, right now, a student can be in school 100% of the time and check all the boxes in terms of seat time and not be, and not
True.
Be competent, right? So I think or we water stuff down or whatever. I just think, again, I think your chicken egg is a great analogy there, because again, we keep arguing for, but let's just get rid of the seat time, and then that by default means that we have to have some kind of accountability. And the only thing that would make sense would be accountability tied to a student's competency or proficiency in each content area. So again, I think there's a lot of. It seems like there's a lot of barriers, but it really could come down to just that one. Obviously, if a school's not geared up to embrace the metrics that they need to be able to demonstrate competency, then there needs to be some kind of bridge or some support for that, and probably a fair amount of professional learning. But again, if you talk to MDE, especially certain people, CTE, like John mentioned earlier, is the clearest example of where that's been evident. But there are all kinds of efforts, again, but they fly in the face of, or they're hinged on students being in their seats 100,000 hours and 180 days.
I didn't realize CTE was really anchoring a lot of this work. They always say a lot of change comes on the fringes. It doesn't necessarily come, from the center. So what is CTE doing that is CBE related, and how are they doing it?
Well, I think that, first of all, the assessment is quite different than, like a general math class or social studies class, that it's performance-based assessment, right? You either can weld these two pieces of metal together and they hold, or they don't, right? And so it's analyzing the skills in kind of a standards-based but definitely more groups of standards through competencies to be able to show that you're able to meet all of those components of what it takes to be able to master this skill. So it's just it's natural, I always say, like in the CT world, in the music world, the performance-based assessments, all that, an A means nothing if you play trombone and the wrong sound comes out, right? You learn how to do it, but if you can't actually do it, it doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, in our traditionally in our content areas, it's been about that you do all these tasks and you get this letter, but in the end, can you actually show mastery of what you're trying to actually do? Can you apply it? And in the CT world, it's all about application. So it's much easier to be able to, and I think people, educators, everybody just, they accept that, it's about the skills. It's not about a letter grade. And unfortunately, in our traditional content subjects, people are still stuck in many, because it's the only thing they've ever known. It's the way it is. It's the way post-secondary does it, is in that A, B, C, or D. But again, we've said for a long time, define what a B is, and you're going to get a different answer from every person in every school and often, unfortunately, every teacher in the state. But if you define skills and if they can master and identify, the mastery of skills, that's a different story.
Mhm.
And so in competency-based ed, that's what you're trying to do is you're trying to show mastery of application. In the CTE world, it's just a natural reality
Mhm.
of those skills, much more important than a letter, right? Like I really don't want a C mechanic. I don't want a C,
True.
nurse, right? I want a nurse that can show that they understand the system of how medicine is distributed and be able to demonstrate that, in that application. And so that's why I think the CTE world is just a natural fit.
Yeah.
And then now they've credentialed these things. So the digital badges or credentials for all these things to be able to go, oh yeah, through this organization, I can show I can do this. And through this welding, through Miller Welding, I can show I can do this, this, and this. So now when somebody's looking to hire a welder, they say, oh, can you do this, 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 and this? That Miller, is a national standard. Oh yeah, and here's my certification for this, 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 and this. Where if you go to Miller and go, yeah, I got to be in welding, they go, what does that mean? So that's, I think, the big part how CT has embraced that idea of CBE and performance-based assessment.
Well, I think the biggest difference now, I mean, I was a CTE teacher over 2 decades ago, and we still did CBE. I mean, it was all skill-based. I was in business, but the students still had to show me that they could do it. It wasn't on a test. They had to actually do it. So that's, when your question, Marcia, about why is it taking so long? I think the big part now that John brings up is there are those certifications now that you can. So instead of just showing me the teacher that you can do it, now there's an actual certification that you can use out in the world to be able to do that. I think that's really important. But the skill base has always been there in CTE since the very beginning. I mean, that's always how it was. And I remember I was a CTE teacher and a social studies teacher. I struggled with social studies to try to bring in what I was doing in CTE. It was very hard in that silo and the traditional way that it was always done to be able to say, show me, because it wasn't the same. So I think we definitely, we're getting there. Yes, Kelly, go ahead and unmute your mic.
Okay. Actually, my question jumps right off of what you were talking about, Lisa, in bridging that kind of academic and CTE world, because I love to think about asking students to be a historian or to be a mathematician as opposing the idea of doing math, right? And I know that many of the industries have standards and certificates where kids can show, I know how to do this welding thing and I have a certificate that says I can do it. Do we know of places that have that kind of stuff? Not like Common Core standards and that kind of thing, because we can talk about standards all day long, and many of the standards have the practices at the front part, but nobody ever reads those, right? People can talk about math standards, but they can't talk about the math practices. The math practices are what we really want students to be able to do. Are there states or districts that are doing what CTE is doing in the career-based world in the academic world? Did that question make sense?
Mhm.
I can tackle some of that. Yes, the answer is nationally we're seeing, pockets of folks that, again, digital badging that is showing competencies or groups of standards that they're giving, digital badges, or that they're identifying those things. And what we're starting to see as well as not only in content, but in employability skills in those areas as well. So, many districts now you see more and more and more have profiles of a graduate. And they, what do they want them to be able to do and be able to communicate, collaborate, problem solve those things. So we've had the chance to visit some districts across the country that are embedding those also with content and saying that, yeah, you have the ability to demonstrate you can do this along with those critical, components of a profile of a graduate and are credentialing those in your traditional content areas, math, ELA, science, social studies. You're starting to see places that are starting to do that around the country based off of ICANN statements, again, showing performance-based assessment. I tell you, that's still probably the big struggle, is that when you do all that, it's still, the assessment system is still so, based on, that multiple choice kind of element but there are some people that are starting to try and push the envelope on creating performance-based assessment. Even College Board is starting to look at some of that, like some, rather than a test of submitting writing samples that are based off of rubrics to be able to identify, what that is. And AI is really getting interesting in that world, to be able to take a look at these and be able to, use a rubric to be able to say whether a student has mastered that ability versus answering questions of a multiple choice test. So we are seeing that. We've had the chance to visit some schools around the country. Lindsay Unified is one in California that I think of right now, that a lot of us have had the chance to go visit. There's a district, a small little district in Kentucky, forget the name, that Buddy Berry runs, that has many of the badges. Kids have to earn those badges, even in those employability skills. And if they don't, they have to go to summer school and be able to show mastery of those employability skills. So yeah, we are starting to see that, but still very narrow, the ones out there to do it, but we do have some examples.
Well, and I think the other piece that we need to address and talk about is the fact that AI is disrupting this whole thing, right? So we have to have, to John's point, we have to have authentic assessments. We have to be able to know what a kid can actually do, because there's not and I say this in all my AI trainings to all the teachers that I work with, there's not a class that you teach that I can't take in 2 weeks with AI. And I haven't taken your class. I haven't taken Algebra 2 in 25, 30 years. I'll go past Algebra 2 in the way that you present it. I'll go pass it with AI in 2 weeks, no problem. But that doesn't mean that I own it. That doesn't mean that it transfers with me. It doesn't mean that I can go out and apply it. It means I can check that box. And we're going to have to move to that. And I think that's what I think a lot of teachers and administrators are worried about right now, is that, AI is proven. It's not a class it can't pass, right? There's not a test it can't take. And if that's the case, then what is it that we want kids to have with them? And going back to some of this conversation about skills versus, content, it's a yes and. They need content to practice the skills, but we also have to realize that we have to explicitly teach skill development. We can't just say, I want to assess communication, and not model and developmentally scale. What does good communication look like? I want you to think critically. Okay, well, what does critical thinking look like? And people will say, well, there's a lot of subjectivity in that. And to John's point, there's more subjectivity in Algebra 1 across this state than there is in anything else. But because it's what we accept, it's the subjectivity we accept. We'll accept subjectivity in the space that 6 teachers teach Algebra 1 in this large high school, and not a single one of them defines an A the same way. So there's inherently subjective, but we have to acknowledge that. We have to wrestle with that. And so I've been pushing to say, don't dismiss the subjectivity in authentic assessment, in experiential learning, in skill development, because you have to acknowledge, if I push you on it, that there's subjectivity in your content courses as well. And I'm hoping that now, I don't say that to beat them up, but it's then, what are we doing as educational leaders and curriculum leaders to come alongside and to teach these teachers, what does that look like for them to live in this new world, this new dynamic of where getting a high school degree or getting a college degree doesn't do you anything unless you can actually show up in a workspace and do the work, right? That paper no longer represents a guarantee that you're going to make enough money to be well, or you're going to find a job where you're going to be able to balance the requirements of that job with your own humanity and be able to navigate this world in a way that you're well. It's been a complex issue. We've accepted acceptable loss of 15% of our kids don't graduate. We can do better, and we have to help our kids do better. And fundamentally, no kid learns at the same rate. No adult learns at the same rate. So this idea that if I give you 1,098 hours, 1,090 hours in 180 days, that's the magical thing that you're going to be ready for whatever that matriculation is false. Right. So we built a system on a false promise, and we really got to wrestle with what does this mean, not just for education, but for society over the next 5 to 10 years as AI disrupts everything around us.
That is very true. Lisa, I know we're kind of in our closing stages.
That's a great way to end it.
It is. I'll let you close out.
Okay.
Like,
I just appreciate the time that you've all taken to be on this and just to have these conversations again. And one other thing that I wanted to point out are there, while Michigan CoOp has started that, there are other organizations like the Future Learning Council and others who are really now starting to move forward. Launch Michigan's doing things, and I know at MDE with the personal curriculums. But what we really run into a lot of times is really that pupil accounting that's keeping it from everyone being able to start moving forward with these without fear to be able to do these. So I just appreciate you sharing this with everyone. And if anyone, wants to have further conversations with the Michigan CoOp, we always have some public webinars throughout the year. So we would love to have conversations with you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robbie. Thank you again, Marcia.
The treasure of time. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you all.